Welcome to No Mud, No Lotus, and we're here to talk about the down and dirty of recovery that often gets stuffed away. It's time to step out of the shame and get into the light, and to share our experiences and begin to heal together rather than sitting alone in our hurt. So today, welcome to the second episode of No Mud, No Lotus, and here at Muddy Lotus Recovery, we strive to offer structured support and community for all types of disorders before and after treatment. So I'm also the founder of Muddy Lotus Recovery, Allison Drugel, and I'm a survivor of co-occurring disorders and addictions. The past couple of years have been especially rough for me, and like most people. So they've also brought about some much needed attention, though, in the world of mental disorders and addictions. And so a lot of things have been often overlooked and wrongly interpreted. And so on this show, we're going to dive into those topics. We're going to bring on survivors, specialists, and we're going to talk about the stuff that needs to be talked about, stuff that is normally shied away from. And we're just going to get right to it. Today, we are going to talk with trauma therapist Karen Roberti from Timberline Knolls outside of Chicago. And we have two survivors here with us today. We have Meg Andrus, who resides in Omaha, Nebraska, and we have Madison Hardy, who lives in Temperance, Michigan. So we're going to be exploring the topic of generational trauma and its connection to mental health. So welcome to the show. So first thing, I'm going to bring in Karen Roberti into the stream. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too. So Karen, you're a trauma therapist at the PHP, the Partial Hospitalization Program at Timberline Knolls in Orland Park, correct?
Yep. Yes,
Okay.
I am.
So can you explain, I'll bet you deal with generational trauma quite a lot. So can you explain for us what that term means?
It's honestly pretty much what it sounds like when there's a hurt in one generation that doesn't get resolved. It's very easy for it to bleed into other generations.
Oh, that's very
And
poetic. That's very poetic.
if
I like that.
thank you. If you don't learn how to take care of your own hurts, or even don't even realize that they're hurts, traumas, pain, whatever you want to call it, then it's easy to repeat the system.
Okay. And we're probably going to get into this a little bit later, but I know a lot of times when you say the word generational trauma, sometimes people put up a wall. I know that's the thing. And it sounds like you're trying to blame somebody else for something you're going through. But that isn't the case, I'm assuming.
I don't really like the word blame. Responsibility. Everybody is responsible for themselves and their own actions. And we, as you know, use a lot of DBT. And one of my favorite dialectics is my family made some bad choices that had some negative impact on me, but I still love them. And knowing that that's okay.
Yeah.
Has been really hard for a lot of people, just to be able to even say there were some things that they did that weren't okay. But they're still my family. I love them. That's all right. You can have that dialectic. You can hold
And
that.
it's not an intention necessarily of somebody's, of course. And that when we say generational, this is something usually that goes on for generations and generations. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not unusual.
Yeah. And so usually the people that may be handing it down have had their own things that so just because they're acting, not even acting out, but just because they're handing down these things to the next generation, they're not trying to do that, first of all. And the whole purpose of our show today is to bring light to it so that we can learn ways or talk about it so that we can bring education to it to stop it. So what are before you can stop something, I think you got to be able to notice it. So what are some of the things that you look for or that you notice in patients that where generational trauma is occurring?
The big things that people talk about when they talk about just any kind of trauma are nightmares, flashbacks,
Mm,
and body memories, which actually body memories doesn't get talked about enough. And so those are the kinds of things that I look for. Hypervigilance, just always being aware of what's going on and perceiving that there's a threat in every corner. Trust issues are super common. Um, Shortened sense of the future, like not what are you going to do in 5 years? I don't even know if I'm going to be around in 5 years. That those kind of questions, not being able to answer those. Anxiety and depression, an increased fight or flight
mm.
response. Self-esteem concerns are probably the biggest thing that I see. That feeling of this, I got hurt, I either deserved it or I'm not good enough or I'm bad and that's why it happened. Um, Shame, guilt, and blame. Yeah, the things that you were talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So when you see people come with some of these issues or symptoms, what are the first steps that you, because I mean, not all the time do you even have the family members around to begin to deal with some of that. So what are some of the practices that you use to be able to dive into this with them to deal with it and heal from it?
It's it it's possible for an individual to heal without the whole family going
Okay.
through it. It is definitely possible. Yeah, yeah. And I use a I personally use a combination of talk and expressive arts therapy,
Hmm.
depending on the person. You know, there's a lot of trauma memories tend to be stored in the nonverbal centers of the brain.
Hmm.
And so accessing that through expressive arts is really helpful.
Yeah, I know that's been key for different things that I've done. That's just it's you work through so much when and you don't even know you're doing it. You know, it's just there's but in expressive arts doesn't just mean painting. Can you explain a
Right,
little bit more about what expressive arts are? Because I think people think I can't draw, so forget it.
right, right. Well, and anybody can draw abstract. You know,
Right.
like drawing is not my favorite, not my milieu either. But I get a lot out by doing collaging and
Okay.
work really hard on that. But just even writing, like
Uh-huh.
journaling or poetry, um, music, writing or listening and responding to music, looking at lyrics of songs and figuring out how to use those. I tend to look at the positive, so I would recommend looking at music and using it to build you up, you know.
Hmm.
And I can do this kind of those kind of songs. So yeah, it's pretty much anything. Movement therapy.
Okay. Do you suggest that somebody does somebody need to go figure out all of the deep dark past in order to heal to go into the future?
Not necessarily. There's
Okay.
two schools, and I've had. I tell people sometimes it's just too traumatic to talk about it and to talk about what happened, and people can't get it out. And I work in PHP. We're 4 weeks long. You know, maybe you stay IOP, you get another 4 weeks, but that's it. So I'm kind of a kickstart in this. Is the way I look at it. So people aren't going to finish in that amount of time. Totally lost my train of thought. What was your question?
Yeah. Well, just because sometimes people are afraid, like you said, to uncover the past, or that may be a stopper for them for wanting to even pursue therapy in the first
Right.
place because it's too hard. So, does somebody, in order to move forward from generational trauma or trauma in general, do they have to go back and uncover the deep, dark secrets of the past?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Thank you for getting
Yeah.
back. Um, no, you can. I tell people that they've got that option
Hmm.
to dig through the muck and the mire, or um, we can address the way it impacts you now.
Okay.
And both ways are valid. It's
Okay.
really just depends on the person and what they want. But both routes are valid.
And so when you address the way that it's impacting you now, are you looking at like behaviors, you're looking at goals, goal setting, values, things like that, and then how you want to move forward?
Yeah, and all of those, the symptoms and signs that I was just talking about a few minutes ago, like, okay, so you have trust issues, so let's work
Uh-huh.
on that.
Okay.
Your concept is totally dependent on other people. How
Mhm.
can we work on you feeling better about yourself?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I can see where generational trauma or your understanding of that may be a really helpful connection to make, because if for some reason your values and your goals and those things are not aligning with you have those truths that you
Mhm.
have inside of you that don't always match up, like they just are what were ingrained in you, from your generations, from your family, and then the disconnect happens when sometimes those like don't mesh, and so you have all these goals you want and all these values you have, and they're not coming together, and that's where we're just like going against a brick wall. But if all of a sudden
Right.
you make that connection, it's like, oh, you know. And so even just knowing that can be like this light bulb going off, because then when you start, it's not, can you talk a little bit about why that's not easy to change? Because sometimes that gets really frustrating. Like when you have
What?
that truth, like you have, I don't know, I'm trying to pick something sillier off the top of my head that's not too deep, but you have, like a truth that your family always has, like, you're supposed to act or dress a certain way. I'm just going to try to pick something vague right now, but and you just have that ingrained in you, and you as a my values and as an adult, like, no, that's not true, but it
Mhm.
pops into your head all the time. And so how can we change that? I mean, how can we move forward from that?
Well, and you've talked about values, and that's really important to be able to identify your values. And is this something that aligns with your values? And if it is,
Mhm.
okay. If it's not, then what exactly do we have to do? And
Mhm.
if dressing one a particular way isn't part of your values because um, that what you're being told is you have to dress very sedate
Uh-huh.
and cover up, and you're feeling more feminist and don't want to do that,
Mhm.
then it's uh, trying it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just, yeah,
And it may feel weird at first. It may feel out of your comfort zone, but then just kind of sitting in the uncomfortable for a minute and exploring
yep.
that. Yeah, thank you. That was a perfect example. The of dressing. Yeah, that was a perfect example. Okay, great. So then what the only other question for right now that I was thinking of is, how important is communication with the family, which we kind of talked about, because you were talking already that you don't have to have your family present in
Right.
order to go through this. Is there some good though in trying to do family therapy? Like, can you talk a little bit about that if they'd had a family member that was willing?
um if you've got somebody who's willing, definitely.
Okay.
I've had families, parents, where we've called and said, when you did this, it made me feel this way. And they were absolutely, you're absolutely right. Yes, that was on us. Um, I've also had situations where people have said, I could never have that conversation with my family. My brothers and sisters don't even see the same abuse as me. They just, it is what it is. And um, so it really, that is a very individual thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So something that maybe you can approach on an individual basis and it has been healing for some people, but definitely not something that you absolutely have to have in order to heal from the trauma. Okay, great. All right. Well, I'm going to go to just a commercial break right now, and then we're going to bring in one of the first survivors and get into with some examples from their stories, and then let you guys interact a little bit. So I'm gonna pull you out, I think. All right. So first, I'm going to just play this brief commercial for a photography workshop that we offer here at Muddy Lotus. It's just one of several workshops that we do. So you heard Karen talk a little bit about how creative arts therapy, expressive arts therapy is important to dealing with trauma. I think that it's important for all co-occurring disorders, and really working through the different issues that we all have, and whether you're a diagnosed issue or whether you're dealing with your own thing just at home. And and you don't have to be an artist to be able to do that. So we have different self-love workshops that fall under the category that we call Bloom, BLOOM, begin to love ourselves once more. And they are all different types of creative workshops. We had one that we ran already that was a painting workshop that was self-love for Valentine's Day that went well, and we brainstormed what we love about ourselves and also the things we'd like to fall away. And then we learned to accept those things. We always have a meditation at the beginning of the workshops. This photography workshop is on body acceptance, and we're going to be trying to do those for some younger generations, as well as some recovery workshops. And body acceptance right now, I've just been hearing so much about, and our next podcast is going to be on the health at every size movement. And it's just something that's really near and dear to my heart. So this workshop here goes through photography, which talks about the basic photography skills, but then gets into abstract photography and loving our bodies. And I will play this clip right now.
Our bodies all work for us in some way, but we don't always work for our bodies. The messages in mainstream media don't always teach us to love our bodies, to stop and see ourselves and what our bodies do for us. How they will work to get the everyday done is to truly see the beauty we all wear. To capture that beauty in all its essence on camera is to see what others see and appreciate it. Join us for an evening of photography basics like framing, unique shots, angles, and composition, all using your smartphone. We will start the evening with a body gratitude guided meditation. Next, we will do a mini lesson on photography basics, including framing, focal point, line, and vantage point. We will step out and take our own pictures, bringing them back to the group to share what we have taken, what we find beautiful. These unique perspectives will offer us a new way of looking at the world around us. We will end with an assignment to use our newfound skills and explore ourselves, taking abstract photography of our own bodies to find the beauty that is already there. So register today for this Monday's Photography Body Acceptance Zoom Bloom Workshop by visiting muddylotusrecovery.org, and truly begin to love yourself again.
Okay, so that workshop's already over, but that's not the one. I have to update that. What we're doing right now is we're offering the workshops scheduled by groups of people. So basically all of those workshops, and I've got them all listed on the website, the art therapy, the photography workshop on body acceptance, and then there's a memoir workshop and an interactive multimedia graphic poetry slam, which I'm super excited about. So we'll play some of those commercials on our next podcasts. And so I just wanted to play that one so people got the idea of what the workshop is about. And speaking of getting the idea about what we are, on May 7th, it's a Saturday, we're going to have a live all-day event on Facebook, we think. No, it's going to be on Facebook. It is. It's going to be on Facebook. And it's going to be every hour. We're going to kind of do demonstrations and of the different workshops and just do some Q&As. We're going to have some smart recovery workshops and not workshops. I'm sorry. We're going to have a smart recovery meetings that we're going to be offering through Muddy Lotus, which are for all disorders and addictions to come and learn how to change their behaviors. So if anybody wants to learn how to take a behavior that they're wanting to change and come and share with people, it's peer-led. And those meetings are online on Zoom, and we'll be offering those. I believe they'll be on Thursday evenings, but check our website and Facebook for those updates coming up in the next few weeks. And then on that May 7th, we're going to show little demonstrations of the different workshops. And if you have a group that you think would be interested, could be like a community group, a parent group, a high school group, a a recovery group that you think would be interested in doing one of the workshops, then you could just contact us, and then there's a form to fill out by how many would be interested. And we can do them on Zoom, or if we can get to you somehow, we can do them live in person. But we just think it's really important to use creative arts to explore ourselves, and to try to explore all of our trauma, all of our disorders, and communicate and connect with each other and build a community of people that can support each other. So also the last thing, I feel like I'm talking a lot. I'm sorry. I'm going to let everybody else talk in a minute, but this next thing is also important. ANITA, the National Eating Disorder Association, has their big walk on April 23rd. And so we've signed up for it, and we hope you do too. Also, Timberline Knolls has theirs. So TK, T at TK. So T is their alumni coordinator. Hi, T. And she is doing a group for Timberline Knolls at Park Ridge, Illinois. And so if you want to contact T to be a part of that group, you can go to their Facebook, but there's her email as well. And if you want, you can contact me and I can get you in touch with her too. So that's on April 23rd, 9 o'clock Central Standard Time. I always have issues with all this time difference. So 9 o'clock Central Standard Time in Park Ridge, Illinois. And then we, Muddy Lotus Recovery people, anybody interested in walking with us in Ann Arbor, Michigan, we are going to be walking on the same day, Saturday, April 23rd at 10 p.m. No, not 10 p.m. My God, that's late. 10 a.m. These are all a.m. people. This is a morning walk. Sam, you would have to get out of bed. It is in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and 10 a.m. And you can contact me at allison@muddylotusrecovery.org. But also, you can go to our Facebook and our website, and you can learn how to donate as well as walk with us. It'll be fun. All in the name of eating disorder awareness, and something near and dear to my heart. And we can have a fun time doing it. I'm sure it'll be a blast. So I'm going to return back now to our regularly scheduled program and bring Karen back into the mix.
Hello.
Hi, Karen. All right. And now I'm going to add another person. I'm going to add Madison to the stream. Yay. Hi.
Madison.
All right. So we're back on No Mud, No Lotus, and we're joined again still by Karen Reverdy from Timberline Knolls in Chicago. And then we have now joining us Madison Hardy from Temperance, Michigan. And Madison is joining us as a survivor of generational trauma, and is going to share with us a little bit. Thank you so much for being willing to come on to the show. You also, just full disclosure, you also are a part of our content team for Muddy Lotus. And what do you do with us? You can tell everybody.
So I run the social medias for Muddy Lotus Recovery.
Yeah,
Great.
she's awesome at it, and kind of keeps my head straight with other things too. She's like constantly sends me like, you're supposed to be doing this now, and so I really appreciate that. But all of our content team, all the people that work with us, all are survivors, and it's all near and dear to their heart. So let's talk about what you've got to share. So I understand that you lived with your mother and her boyfriend up until, what was it, age 11, 10, 9?
I was 10.
10. Okay. I'm getting this stories mixed up. So until age 10. And your mother suffered from, was it drug and alcohol disorder or abuse?
Yes.
Okay. And so I'm from what I understand, the situation may have been a little bit neglectful in your case, and then there may have been some things emotionally traumatizing, but also that were handed down to you. So can you go over some of that and share with us a little bit of that story?
Yeah, so I did live with my mom until I was 10, and when I was 7, my brother was born, so it was me, him, and then my mom. Her boyfriend was there too, but he wasn't home as often as my mom. He did work, so he was not in the home often. And my mom did use in the home, so that was hard to watch, especially since I didn't have a full understanding of what was going on. So I think the worst part for me was I didn't understand why sometimes my mom was great and loving and wanted to be there, and then other times she was so disconnected and angry and aggressive. And so that was really hard for me. It was kind of scary to never know, waking up, who was going to be or who my mom was going to be that day. And whenever she did have my brother, it was hard for me because I was 7 and trying to take care of myself while also trying to take care of my brother. And I didn't know how to raise a kid at that point. And it was hard. But
yeah, that seems like a lot of responsibility for somebody so young to have to deal with. So Karen, I have a question for you, being the expert in the room. What kind of effect, when somebody is that young, what kind of effect does that have on them to have to grow up so fast? Like, what kind of long-term effects would that have for somebody, like missing? I mean, I'm guessing, Madison, did you feel like parts of, you felt like, to me, it sounds like you were a little adult.
It felt like that. I feel like, I had my little stool. I was 7 making dinner. We had Kraft mac and cheese every night because that's what I knew how to make.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a lot of responsibility, and probably not the fun stuff that childhood, or the carefree parts of childhood that you're supposed to have. So what kind of effect, Karen, can that have on somebody to not have those parts of childhood where you're supposed to be like finding yourself, I guess, or being carefree?
Well, and so part of it is growing up and not knowing who you are, not knowing what you like, not because what you know is what you should do. You know, and that being hyper responsible, in school, being the top student, the one who gets everything done ahead of time. It can dampen, I guess is the word I want to use, your sense of fun, your joy in life, that, if you don't get to have that as a kid, you don't even realize that it exists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The only reason I smiled there was because I met Madison as her teacher in high school, 10th grade year for her, but so it was a little after that. So Madison, you moved to Monroe to be with your dad then for the second part. Okay, so when you moved, the Madison I know, definitely was what Karen just described. Would be somebody who was the all A student, who would be co-chief editor of my staff, who would be running the social media, and that's all wonderful. I mean, I don't think anybody would begrudge somebody from having all of that, excelling in life like that. But can you kind of tell us a little bit about how that transition was and when the trauma started to come kind of to the head for you?
Yeah. So when I first moved here, like I said before, I didn't have a full understanding of what I went through. I thought it was normal. I thought that's what life was for everybody. And then I moved in with my dad, and I have siblings with my dad as well. And so it was a complete shift from how my life was. I went from doing whatever I wanted all of the time to living in a structured home with a family. And we never talked about it. I never went to therapy at first. We never talked about what happened with my mom. And it was just a switch for me. I feel like it just flipped. And I thought I was fine with it. I really thought that my mom didn't really have an effect on my life. And I became obsessed with being a perfect person. I became obsessed with having good grades. And so I think it sounds silly now, but I had a 4.0 GPA up until I was in 11th grade, and then I got a B in math. And when I got that B, I feel like I just fell apart. And I know it sounds silly, but at that point, it was out of my control, and I had been trying so hard to be perfect in chasing everybody's approval. I felt like when I got that B that I failed. And it was heartbreaking for me. And so then I feel like I started saying things like, maybe this is why your mom wouldn't connect to you, because you can't be good enough for everybody. And I think that's when I started to process and started to remember things. And that's when I started my recovery journey.
Yeah, that was where I was going to go with that. Like Karen, I was going to say, is there usually a point like that for people that like Madison was saying, and it doesn't sound like that to me just because I understand that, but I can see what you mean. Like where it seems it doesn't have to be some big, thing that starts your recovery journey. It doesn't have to be, to others it might seem like, well, you got to be, but I completely understand. It's going to be that trauma trigger does not look the same to everybody, and that B represents so much more to you, and has so much more attached to it, where to somebody else it might be, well, what the heck, you're just so stuck on your grades and what's your deal, and that voice is in your own head doing that too, right? I mean, I can relate with that, and you beat yourself up enough, so for the outside world they should know that that's not really what's going on. So when you see people and you think like, get over it. I have a cup somewhere, a mug upstairs that says, no, I can't just get over it. Because that's not what it's about. Karen, can you talk to us what that's really about so that people out there can understand a little bit when they think it's something trivial like that?
It starts with, it starts with a lack of balance and feeling out of control. I mean, the underlying dynamic and all trauma is not being in control, and that's the scariest thing on the planet. Once you've been in a situation where you can't be in control, where you're not in control, feeling out of control is very, very scary. And when that happens as a kid, that gets internalized, and kids think the whole world revolves around them, so it's their fault if bad things are happening to them, and that grows with them. And as the older you get, the more that feeling is, I have to be perfect in order to be valid, to be worthy, to be okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, to the outside world, it might look like something. I relate that with, with food, with eating disorders, same thing. Like, why would you not just eat that? Or with alcoholism, why would you not just stop drinking? Like, these things all just to anybody else look like, why are you so upset about it? But it's not really about that. I can't stress that enough, that it's got attached to it this bigger thing. So Madison, I know, and not to flash forward the story so much, but I know that you went through a lot of those things. How did you begin? You said your recovery story began there. How did you, can you give us maybe a brief, how you dealt with what things did you do to go through recovery, or what strategies worked for you?
Yeah. So it started at that point, I think, is when I started opening up to my parents here in Michigan. And just telling them that I didn't feel right. I was dealing with a lot of really negative feelings about myself, and I was engaging in really destructive behaviors. And so my parents and I talked about it, and I went into a short-term program. And that's kind of where it started. My senior year, or the summer before my senior year of high school, I went into a program. And I think at first I thought that I was going to go into the program, come out, and then be better. And so I did that. I went to the program. I did their lessons. I went to all of the groups, and I was like, great, I'm better. I can do it. And then I went back home, and it was gone. I felt like everything that I had learned was gone. And I think it's because I wasn't going there to process. I wasn't going there to grow. I think I was going there to fix myself. And I thought, in my mind at that point, recovery was like that. You fix yourself and then you're done. I didn't realize that it was a lifelong journey. You're not. And I just don't think it's talked about. I think a lot of times you go to therapy and you think, okay, this is exactly what I need, but it's not the same for everybody. And so I had to do a lot of self-reflection and just figure out, what do I need? And also I needed to be willing to process my past. And I wasn't for a long time. I just wasn't ready, I think, to deal with it. And I think I was clinging to it. So I did a lot with DBT, and that helped. And then recently I am working with EMDR.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Can you
think
explain to people what that is?
I don't have a full understanding, but I know it's
eye movement, something.
it's about reprogramming your brain using bilateral stimulation. And so I started that. I started last year actually to try it, and I wasn't ready. And so when I first did it, it was more harmful than helpful.
Mm.
And I feel like I spiraled a little bit.
Oh, I think she's frozen.
I think she froze.
Yeah, she froze. Karen, while we're waiting for her, you want to tell us what does it stand for? EMDR. I'm on the last. It's eye movement. Oh, I'll look it up. But can you? That's okay. I will look it up. It's right on the tip of my tongue. I know this. But I can take her in and out because I was ready to go to the next thing anyway. But the eye movement is just one of several things. She mentioned DBT. I know you guys do that at TK and are very familiar with that. So all of these things going forward, one thing that I was going to get into with Madison next, the last thing was how it affects, and I can talk a little bit about that. So while we're waiting for her, and let me see if I can take her out and yep, she took herself out. She's coming back in, I'm sure. One thing that she writes about in her blog, because she has a blog about generational trauma for Muddy Lotus, and it's about how it affected her as a mom. And that's the biggest thing. And so I know that for myself with simply, and there's a lot more to it, but the eating stuff, like I was very concerned about having kids. I was very worried about how that would impact my children and just all of the things that I deal with. I didn't want to pass it on. Like, nope, not going to do it. So I know that that's a concern for a lot of people who suffer from trauma or suffer from disorders, anything with mental health, that they're really concerned about passing it on to the next generation. And we're talking about generational trauma. So can you offer any, I guess, advice or comforting words to people so that they don't feel like I'm never having kids, I can't do this?
Well, one, that's a valid choice if that's what you decide. And
Absolutely.
But do not, I would recommend that you not make that choice out of fear. The very fact that a person is aware that of their issues and is not wanting to pass them on that's the first step. I mean, awareness is the first step, and therapy is great for that, for working on how to manage situations so that you don't pass on the trauma, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have friends where that is their choice, and that is absolutely valid. And then, sometimes I feel like the fact that, and what a therapist said to me, this was really early on. And I didn't believe her for a really long time, but I think as a 42-year-old woman now with my kids, my daughter's going to graduate next year, I'm starting to understand what she was meaning, that sometimes what you've lived through, though, can be, I think she said something to me like, you're going to do your damnedest to make sure that that's not going to happen, and I didn't believe her. And I think maybe that's not true in some ways, but in the other way, though, I do feel like I can talk to my kids, I can talk to my students a little bit more. So through that, I think that we can feel like we have that experience, that lived experience that we can share, the same that we're trying to do here and share with each other. I think is something we can do with our kids if we're open to that too. So I see Madison backstage, so I'm going to bring her back in and talk to her about the same thing. Are you back with us? So I just talked about my experience with it, but the question I was going to ask you, Madison, was about how it affected, because I know your blog is about generational trauma, and your last one was, or maybe the time before that, was about affecting your motherhood and your fears about that. And what Karen was just talking about was that, you know, if you choose not to have kids, like that's your choice, and that's absolutely fine, but don't let fear be a factor in that. So how has your generational trauma affected your motherhood?
So I think it's made me much more aware of how I act around my kids. I know growing up, my mom would tell me that she treated me the way that she did because that's how her mom treated her, and that's all she knew. And so my mom and I did not connect at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to connect with my kids. And that was so hard for me. I would like obsess over having this perfect connection, and you can't control how you feel. You can't control how your kids feel, but you can control how you act. And so that's been really important for me. And I think I've been a lot more aware of how I act and intentionally doing things to connect with my kids. We live in the age of phones and social media, and so it's so hard to get swept up in life. But because of my trauma, I've been able to be really intentional about my connection.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's really good advice to give everybody, not just people with generational trauma. Okay, I'm gonna bring Meg in here, who's been waiting patiently backstage. So welcome, this Meg Andrus, and she's in Omaha, Nebraska. Hello.
Hello.
All right. So Meg is also, full disclosure, part of our content team. And tell us what you do for Muddy Lotus.
I am the webmaster. I'm still not sure how that happened because I've never once designed a website before in my life, but somehow it worked out.
It did.
I also write the Thursday blog.
Yes, and that's Staying Clean, right?
Yes, it is.
All right, great. So the reason that we have you on today, though, is generational trauma. And can you explain? I understand that your mother was an addict, and at a very young age, you were adopted. And then, and what I didn't understand, I got kind of mixed up on, was that you did see your mother, like she had visitation rights, but you didn't live with her. So can you explain a little bit of that?
Yeah. So with adoption, there's open adoptions and closed adoptions. Closed adoptions are where you have no contact with your birth parents at all. Mine was an open adoption. I was adopted from birth, but because it was open, I saw my birth mother a few times a year. So I did know her. I never knew my birth father because they never got married. They were separated. He chose to go to Texas. They were both addicts. They were both actually intoxicated when I was conceived. So I was always warned that I was like predisposed to is that the word? I don't know. Yeah, predisposed to addiction. So I was always warned about that. And I should have listened more clearly, but I did not.
Okay. Well, I don't know about the should haves, but I think the fact that you're doing all right is awesome. And I think that did you speak with your birth mother at all now, or?
No, she passed when I was 11.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. How do you think then, that being said, that this affects you today? Obviously you're here because you struggled with some of her same addictions, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to explain a little bit about how you think that was passed down, or how that's been brought to the forefront?
Yeah. So when she passed when I was 11, like I always knew she struggled with substance abuse. And when she passed, I wasn't told until I was 16 that it was suicide, but I always knew it was. It wasn't until much later, like even after I was 16, I think it wasn't until I was actually like 20-ish that I was told it was an intentional heroin overdose. It was almost exactly a year after her death that I first drank alcohol, when I was 12. When you lose your mom, no matter whether you're adopted and only see your birth mother a few times a year, it's like a piece of you dies with her. And so obviously a year later, I was still grieving hard, and I did not want to be. So I ended up at a party where there was alcohol, and I did not hesitate when the bottle got to me. I just immediately took it and took a drink, and that was it for me. And after that night, I realized I could find relief and escape in alcohol. And so I drank every chance I could get. I would take alcohol from my parents, from other people, anywhere I could get it. And it wasn't long after until I started abusing other substances too. Being 12, I didn't really understand what I was getting into. I think a part of me wanted to understand addiction, wanted to understand what Marie, my birth mother, went through and why she couldn't stop, why she did what she did. But a lot of it, like Karen talked about how, and I think you did too a little bit, about feelings of guilt and shame with generational trauma. And I had that. I know it wasn't rational, but I blame myself for her death. I was told a lot that I saved her life many times, but what I heard for a long time was when it mattered most, I was not enough to save her. And so I never felt like I was enough. Even before her death, I struggled with feelings of inadequacy. It could have been the fact that I was adopted and I was too young to understand that I was given up for adoption because Marie realized that she couldn't give me the life that I deserved.
I'm going to interject for a second before we go on. Karen, so talking about grief and loss and its connection with generational trauma, I know that's like another show. But yeah, it's another show. But in this case, since we're talking about stopping the cycle, and we're looking for positive ways for people to let go of some of that. And I'm going to ask you in a second, Meg, the same thing about some of the things that may have helped you do some of that or turn that around for you, and maybe like what began that journey for you. Those out there that are struggling with loss of a loved one and knowing that that's in their history, their family history. What advice or what strategies, even therapeutic strategies, what do you suggest that people do with that loss?
You're asking me to start?
Yes, Karen.
I would
say, sorry.
Okay. I would say definitely get into therapy, and talk to your therapist about what works for you. Like I'm a little hesitant to say, okay, oh, here, try this, because sure. There's some things that you deserve support for, and doing it alone can be really, really difficult. So that would be my first, and there's support groups for grief and loss. It is a huge issue, and it is intertwined with trauma in so many ways. So yeah. Mm-hmm. But I would say get
Meg, is that what I mean? Is that kind of your experience? Is that grief and loss is kind of is what propelled you into that?
It was the grief, loss, guilt, feelings of inadequacy. They were all the driving forces, especially in the beginning, behind my substance abuse. Yes. And yeah, it was, I didn't want to cope, didn't want to deal with the feelings that they brought up. I became suicidal myself. And so I chose to turn to substances to deal with that because I didn't want to feel. And there were other factors that went into my addiction, many other factors. But the biggest one and the driving force behind it was my trauma with what Marie went through and how she died because of it.
What do you do you even know? I'm not positive you do. Was there a generational thing before Marie? I mean, is it something that's handed down from family, or are you not aware?
I know she had mood disorders too, and I know that is a generational thing. Yep. I know with Joey, my birth father, all I know about him is that he was at one point a drug dealer until he went to jail because of it. So I know it runs on both sides of my family, at least in some way.
Makes sense. Yeah. Well, then let's talk about then when, Madison talked about her kind of like when her recovery journey began. So the same thing, what was your defining moment when, and it doesn't mean that it was all peachy from there, because I know that for none of us really get it that way. And so, and I do, Karen, we'll come back to that about it not being a linear process. So start thinking about that question. But Meg, what was your kind of like moment of starting recovery?
Funnily enough, the same driving forces behind what started and propelled my addiction were what gave me the motivation to stop. It was all these feelings, because I realized eventually that it was not my fault that she died. It was not it wasn't any lack of me not being good enough that she couldn't quit, that she chose to overdose on heroin. And on one of my birthdays, I don't remember which birthday because I was so out of it for so long. My birth grandmother gave me a letter that Marie wrote me. And in it, she said that all she wanted, like the thing she wanted most was for me to have a long and happy and healthy life. Oh. And I realized I was doing the exact opposite. And all I ever wanted was to be good enough. I did not feel like it. But I also wanted to make her proud. And I realized that the road I was going down, the road I was on, if she could see me, she would not be proud. Would she be angry? No, because she would understand. But she would be devastated and heartbroken and maybe even a little disappointed. And so I realized she may not be here physically, but I can still make her proud. And I can choose to let what I went through either continue to destroy me, or I can choose to let it make me stronger. So I reached out to a friend. I confessed to her what I was going through, and she said she would get me help. A week later, the police were called on me for my poor decisions. And but eventually I was motivated enough to seek treatment after that. So the same things that drove me into my addiction were the same things that saved me. It was all Marie.
That's amazing. That is an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming. So sometimes the things that bring us down. It's back to there's two sides to everything. I mean, that's one of our first workshops was about that, like all the things we wish that we could change about ourselves. But then those same things are also sometimes the things that save us, the things that are good about us. You know, they can be our characteristics and our personalities that we sometimes hate. I hate using that word, but that hate and just want to like make go away, but can also be the characteristics that are great in us. We just have to see them from a different point of view, and we have to see the potential that they could possibly have. But it's really hard to do that when you're in the place that you were probably in. And I think you're incredibly brave. And I think that it takes for both of you, and I think for probably a lot of people listening, that it takes a lot to even begin to wade through some of this mud. Oh my gosh, I just used the symbolism. But Karen, I want to go back to that question about I already forgot it. That story like took me away for a minute. But
well, the recovery not being linear.
Because that it was brought up a couple times. It was brought up when we were talking to Madison, and I put it on my phone to like bring back up, and then now we're hearing it again with Meg. And I've been I know personally a couple of people I've been talking with that were previously at TK and myself, feeling like downtrodden once in a while when you feel like, oh my God, I'm still here. I'm back here again. So it's cheesy, but I would really like to address that at the end here, and anybody, like all of us, to comment maybe about recovery not being linear and how it's cheesy to say that we're not back at the beginning, but how that's true and why that's true. And so let's just start with, what do I mean by recovery is not linear, Karen?
Well, the first thing that I say about recovery in anything, but recovery from trauma is, first of all, trauma is messy. Recovery from trauma is messy. You know, it's not like you deal with one nice little issue and you put that away and then you go on to the next box, check off that box. It would be great, but that's not people. The diagram I use in group isn't even like a straight line that goes backwards, and it's a big old mess. Like, that's what trauma recovery looks like. There is a beginning and an end, but in the middle, it's complete chaos. Or that's what it feels like, and that's what it looks like, especially to the outside. The other image that I use, I wish Alyssa was here because she did such an elegant job of describing this last week.
Yeah.
With the spiral. Image.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The spiral image of recovery is that you, when you deal with an issue and you wind up dealing with that same issue, And it feels like, why am I still here? Why am I still dealing with this? I thought I had it done. You're not, again, it's not linear. So you're going down, you're dealing with it on a much deeper level. And there's so many levels to dealing with trauma that you can wind up working the same issue through on different levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a beautiful example, an illustration of that. Madison, what do you think about, like, what are you still talking about it not being linear? What are some things that you still deal with now, and what advice do you have about, and what are your thoughts about that?
I think now the biggest thing that I am still working on is chasing a connection with my mom and trying to force, and it sounds silly, but like to fill that hole that I feel like I didn't get because she just didn't care for me. And so when I first started dealing with it, it was all about, okay, how can I make myself feel better now? What tools do I have now? And what worked for me then was journaling. And I would journal and try to make myself feel better. But then I was still having those feelings of emptiness. So then I tried different hobbies because that's what they thought while still journaling. And it helped. But then I still was constantly chasing more. So it's definitely something that I still work on, but the most helpful thing for me is to try just to be mindful that it's the trauma talking, and just because I might feel inadequate doesn't mean that I am. And it's a big thing for me was finally just accepting it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, beautifully put. Just because I feel inadequate does not mean that I am. That's really beautifully put, for sure. Meg, what about you? What is for things not being linear and for moving forward and having setbacks? What are some experiences or just some advice about that idea?
Yeah, I agree. Recovery is not linear. I think if I remember Alyssa, when she was talking about it last week, she said something along the lines of, we never forget what we learn unless we have amnesia.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's it.
I love that because that is true. Unless you have amnesia, you do not forget what you learn. And so no matter where you are, no matter whether you have a lapse or relapse or whatever, you still have those tools and those skills in your toolbox. You didn't unlearn them.
Mm-hmm.
You may have had a brief setback, but you didn't learn them. They're still there. You can still take them out and use them anytime you want. And but for me, what has helped me the most is the connections I have. For a long time, I did not have healthy relationships in any way. They were very toxic, whether it was friendships, romantic relationships, even with my family. And going to treatment was actually where I found some of the first healthy relationships in my life. And it is thanks to like my friends from TK that I recognize now, like what Madison said, just because I feel inadequate, just because I feel like a failure doesn't mean I am.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we need each other to hear that. Sometimes I need a cat meme. Meg.
Yes.
She knows what I'm talking about because sometimes Meg might send me a cat meme when I need one. So sometimes we can do that for each other because the whole bottom line is we aren't alone. And sometimes what the voices in our head are saying are not just because we're thinking them. It's not true. Madison, you put that beautifully. And sometimes we just need to be reminded of that. Well, we're at our hour, so I'm gonna, even though we could go forever on this topic and so many branches from this topic, which we will revisit. So hopefully you're all available. So next time, we're going to be talking about health at every size, but I wanted to thank you guys for being here. So thank you, Meg, Madison, Karen, for being with us today. I hope the listeners out there are just as enlightened and as emboldened by everything you shared. Thank you for being so vulnerable today. And I know it takes a lot to come and share that much of yourself, but I just know that sharing your experiences with everybody else has made such a difference. And so I hope that you realize that and just thank you so much. So I'm going to take you out of the stream right now. Say goodbye. I'll call you in a minute. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so that's all we have for our show this week, but next week we're going to be joined by Alyssa again, who was on vacation, and then Karen will rejoin us, and we're going to do health at every size, the health at every size movement, and explore what that's all about, and how to we'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, about body acceptance, not and body positivity, and how it means not necessarily that we're yay body, but just accepting and appreciating what our bodies do for us, and body neutrality, and how those can be the first steps at truly loving ourselves again, and how that can be the first step in healing. So thank you, and have a great rest of your Sunday, and check us out on muddylotusrecovery.org and on our Facebook, and we'll see you next Sunday. All right. Bye, everybody.